Welcome to Beyond the Suit, the podcast that aims to push the current boundaries and conventional thoughts of those working in the legal industry and look beyond the suit, brought to you by Fintelligent. I'm your host, Zac Green, and across the podcast, I'll be speaking to legal professionals from all levels and backgrounds, opening a new door for insight into the legal world. You can expect conversations from inspirational people that aim to advise and offer insight on the lighter side of the industry, from pointers on progression and words of wisdom to funny stories that break the stereotype. Let's look beyond the suit. Welcome back to part 2 of our episode with Simon Whitehead on Beyond the Suit. We hope you enjoy. In terms of obviously looking back at sort of, getting into HRC and starting that up, obviously we talked a touch on how that affected your family, but for you yourself, what were your first key challenges in HRC and how did you go about navigating those?
Well, I suppose the first key challenge was getting out of EOS and getting the SRA approval to sort of start it. And I think I probably underestimated just how much of a procedural headache that was at the time. I mean, it might be very different now, but at the time it just felt that it went on forever, and every question that you answered then led to another 10 questions in respect of that. So that I hadn't factored that in. It was just frustrating more than sort of difficult, if you like. Challenges really were, like any business that wants to grow and is growing, is when is the right time to grow, when is the right, if you've got a really good candidate that presents themselves to you, but you feel that you're a little early in the cycle to sort of say yes, but they're a really good candidate, that's the challenge of, do you take the risk or not? Because then when you can be ready to do it and everyone's sort of bending at the seams, the candidate might not be available, the right person. And I think that is the challenge of then not making the wrong recruits, making the right recruits, I suppose, is the challenge. And that fitting in with your time and your cycle within the business and being able to afford to make that investment, especially in a law firm, because, the way I used to budget it was say to someone, right, okay, you've got 6 months to basically get up to speed. And I'm going to budget 0 income for you for the first 6 months. And then for the second 6 months, we'll phase it so that by month 9, I expect them to be where they need to be, which was very generous and conservative. Certainly isn't how we would do it at Brabners, but then that's a different firm, a different environment. But that helped me then to know that I had 12 months really. And if I could afford to pay the wage for 12 months, then ultimately that gave them the fighting chance to be able to deliver on that, which meant that growth was slow. But then law firm growth, I think, generally is, unless you're going to go out and find a team or merge or find, something that offers a sort of a boost to that. I think it just generally is quite a slow growth industry or profession. But yeah, I'd say the recruitment challenge, finding the right person at the right time, that's the big challenge.
As well as being a lawyer and an entrepreneur, you're also a budding thespian.
I wouldn't go that way.
How would you describe the impact of theatre on your life, and how did you get involved in it?
Yeah, so I'm not a thespian by any stretch of the imagination. I like theatre, and I am a chair of a children's theatre company called M6, based out in Rochdale. And I was for a long time, finished about 5 years ago now, a trustee at Oldham Coliseum Theatre as well. And I got into it by an organisation called Business in the Arts that ran an event in Manchester and basically said, look, there are all these arts organisations that want professionals on their boards to help them progress, navigate, to succeed. And I like the arts, and I thought I've got something to offer. So I went via that route, which was a really good organisation that sadly no longer exists. Started at Oldham Coliseum, and then got asked to do a project for M6 Theatre around their employment contracts and employee handbook. And that was about, I don't know, probably about 15 years ago. And now I am chair of the board. It just is it's like taking yourself out of sort of the corporate world, if you like, and putting yourself into a very different world, where the motivators, the objectives are very different to a law firm or a business. Don't get me wrong, it's run very, very efficiently and effectively, but it's all about the outcomes are about the difference, certainly at M6, the difference it's making to children's lives as opposed to, return. Well, the return on investment is the effect it's having on children's life as opposed to how much money are we generating, which it is nice to have that different perspective. It's good because I feel like I'm offering sort of my skills, my experience, and it gives me a lot back ultimately. It gives me back in respect of seeing the difference that we make and also working in that different environment with different creative people. It's a nice yin and yang of sort of, the law, and then to sort of immerse yourself in the arts for a few hours.
Is there any takeaways from sort of that side of things that you could bring into the workplace from your time in the theatre and the arts and doing that type of work?
I think it's about keeping, not becoming insular, keeping your sort of network, if you like, as wide as possible. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes you can become very insular if you're, for me, if I'm just working with the recruitment businesses and spending time with lawyers and other professionals, it's not really, really narrow, but at the same time, it's the same type of people. Whereas with the arts, it just sort of brings in a different dimension. So again, it allows you to understand what's going on and work with different people. So it improves your ability really to be a good team player, really, I would say. As well as then sort of understanding people from different perspectives and who are motivated by different things, which I think I just find really interesting.
Do you yourself get involved in the plays, or are you behind the scenes?
I have no. I enjoy watching them, but yeah, that's where my involvement sort of ends. The occasional sort of speech. But yeah, I have no desire to be tripping the boards or doing anything in front, which is quite unusual in itself because a lot of the people who are on the board are very creative and work in that industry. But it's a nice mix again of, business, education, arts, creative people. So you get to see and understand things from different perspectives, which isn't always entrepreneurial or business, which I think has a different mindset, and neither's wrong or right. It's just interesting to see things from different perspectives.
Is there one play currently that you're always going to see or really like?
We're just developing at the moment. It's just done R&D and it's about to go on a nationwide tour called The Nest. So M6 is, as I say, a theatre that produces for young children, young people. There are two aspects to it. It's a participation theatre, so it runs theatre groups in Rochdale. It does outreach as well, and then it creates new and original theatre for children and young people. And they're just finishing at the moment one called The Nest, which is what I'm going to go and see in a couple of weeks' time. So that's my... And then the other thing is I've got to take my middle son wants to go and see Christmas Carol because he's doing it for his GCSE. So that's where I'm going in December.
Wow. Looking back, going to obviously you're at HRC, then you eventually rejoined Brabners, but you had, after maybe a few sort of struggles on the way, you had so much success, you won a few awards. HRC really was starting to develop a great reputation and growing into the market. So What was your decision to essentially, go back into Brabners, and were you concerned that the success HRC had would sort of stunt your career if you went back?
No, I think it was probably the other way around. So we were at a crossroads with HRC, in as much as it had started pretty much as sort of a niche firm, and that had evolved. So, my background was employment and was in the recruitment sector. The issues that my recruitment clients were coming to me with needed commercial lawyers, corporate lawyers. So we added commercial and corporate lawyers, and then gave them the platform to say, right, okay, build your practice, build the business. And then, because then for lots of corporate transactions need property lawyers, we added a property team. And so we'd started to move away from our very sort of like focused niche core of what we were doing. And we'd become, in effect, a sort of a small commercial law firm. And it was sort of at a crossroads, because if we wanted to kick on and grow, then what were we going to grow into? And were we going to grow into a commercial law firm? And then what was our USP? What was our difference to the other mid-market commercial law firms that existed? How would we stand out in the market? Why would we be attractive to the people we would need to attract? And you get to a point, I think, in most businesses, but certainly in that business, where, you couldn't just do it half-heartedly. If you were going to go, you had to go a big jump. When we're at the stage where there was a big jump that was going to be needed. And I'd been doing it for 6 years and had started to feel sort of not overwhelmed, but just sort of like, is this it? What's the end point? What's the end game for me in respect to this? What am I aspiring to? Because I'd started off with wanting to do it myself, and I've done that, but I'd sort of needed to recalibrate, if you like, what my next focus, aspiration, target, objective was going to be. And I wasn't sure, to be honest. Or did we go back to being the niche? And what would that ultimately look like? And it is weird, because you start having these thoughts, then all of a sudden things start bubbling around you. And then there were a few firms sniffing, nothing more than sort of really, we want a conversation, we're really interested. And then there was a sort of an offer on the table, which, if I'd have been perhaps 15 years older, might have been attractive, because it was pretty much, we want to buy the goodwill, stay around long enough to make sure that everyone's happy and settled, and then you can retire. But that didn't feel particularly attractive. I felt I had more that I wanted to do. And it wasn't enough to just simply sail off into the sunset and to retire, or certainly not what I would perceive as enough to allow me to do that. And then, the Brabners opportunity sort of came around, and I sort of looked and thought, well, if we are going to go into that mid-market space, that sort of independent law firm, commercial law firm space, I had really fond memories. I didn't leave Brabners because I didn't like it. I left Brabners because an opportunity presented itself. And so the conversation started. And then, a big thing of that was like, where do I think I will be happy? Where do I think the team will be happy? And, I was made by Brabners, if you like. I spent a long time there. And I felt there was a lot of synergy in the culture that we created at HRC with the culture that I had enjoyed at Brabners, because it was just natural that that's how it would come about. So I thought it was quite a good fit, and it gave me the platform to get rid of the bits of running a business that I was finding not particularly exciting and a bit restrictive, and allowed me to concentrate on the parts of what I enjoyed doing. So working with clients, building relationships with clients, and, not having to worry necessarily. Someone else was worrying about cash flow. Someone else was worrying about paying the wage bill. Someone else was worrying about sorting out the indemnity insurance, which are all really important parts of a law firm. but weren't the bits that really sort of floated my boat, and had become more thorny. As we got bigger, it had become a bigger job. So we were at a point where it was either appoint a chief exec or appoint someone that would be the operations, which was a cost that wasn't necessarily going to deliver any fee income, which then meant that we had to move faster and quicker to grow, to create the revenue that we needed to keep everyone earning what they wanted to earn, or looked for an alternative. And that was really, again, timing. Just bizarre how these things work. And it was just like, actually, no, this is a decent, and Brabners had changed a lot. We've got new chief exec, new managing partner, a refreshed vision. There was the start of an exciting journey that you felt actually we could get in and play a part of. So sort of the world's aligned again, and it just became a very easy decision to make, rather than sort of this really big, tortured, what am I going to do? It was just like, actually, this is a really good opportunity. And again, will I regret not doing it? And the answer was, yeah, probably. So that's how we ended up back at Brabners.
What was your proudest moment at HRC, and when did you first start to feel it was a real success?
It's bizarre because I'm not one that necessarily buys into external sort of praise or recognition. But I think getting the Manchester Law Society's award for, it was basically small firm. I don't think it was called small firm, but basically it was sort of the best small firm legal firm in Manchester. That felt like a really proud moment, because it was a sort of an external sort of verification, if you like, or an external sort of recognition of the fact that what we had done had been, I mean, it's not disruptive in the sense of sort of Uber or sort of Amazon, but it was, something different of its time. And that was nice to feel that recognition was sort of given, and it was good for the team to feel that actually, people were seeing us as having done something good. So I'd say that's probably the proudest moment, because of how the team sort of got excited about that and felt really the same as I did, sort of that external recognition was something that gave us all a boost, really.
That's really interesting. What struggles did you face with COVID hitting sort of not long after returning, and did that kind of make you feel like you had any regrets, or did you think you kind of, like sold the business at exactly the right time?
No, the opposite in reality, because, in the nicest way possible, it was nice not to have to make some really hard, big decisions really quickly. And, you forget, I think, at the time just how uncertain things were about, would clients start going to the wall? Would they be able to pay the bills? Would there still be a need for legal services whilst we were in lockdown? All those questions were just unknowns, because it was something completely unprecedented. So it was nice not to have to navigate all those quandaries and problems and uncertainties by yourself. It was nice to do it within a firm where there was a collective uncertainty. I mean, no one had the answer, but at least you felt comfort from the fact that everyone was in it together, and the decisions were collective decisions rather than you having to make decisions by yourself. And plus, that's having a chief exec and a managing partner and a good ops team is where those sorts of issues, that's when they come into their own and show the real value of it. So it was the complete opposite. I often sort of say, that might have been the nail in the coffin, really, of HRC, of like, oh my God, but it would have been hard, I think, as a small business to sort of stay, I don't know, for it to have really sort of been a positive. It may well have been, but I was just quite pleased that I didn't have to make all those decisions by myself when it hit.
Well, you've mentioned timing couple of times already. Like, I think that's definitely perfect timing. As someone who had to go through some challenges over COVID and navigate that as a small business owner, I think you definitely made that decision at the right time, I feel.
Yeah, no, it certainly. I mean, it was interesting as well to see. So at HRC, I was very much of the mindset, I don't mind where you work, as long as the clients are happy, the work's getting done, and ultimately the fees are being delivered. Fill your boots if you want to work at home a day a week or 2 days a week. On that, I think, sort of coming back to Brabners, that was something that hadn't been embraced at that point. And then it was, really interesting to see how obviously lockdown just forced that to be the new norm to a certain degree. And I think, again, we would have lost our USP to a certain degree because, was pre-COVID was still quite unusual, that sort of hybrid approach to working. And we were certainly seeing that was an attractive option, sort of offer to sort of candidates. And I think sort of post-COVID, where obviously everyone works like that, and again, it would have just taken away that why go to a small firm type opportunity. So again, timing really, I suppose. But it's, I was pleased that I wasn't having to make all those decisions by myself.
From your experience, what wisdom, I guess, would you impart to lawyers who are debating whether or not to go independent?
Don't underestimate how difficult it can be. And I think, you are reliant on your clients and the services that you sell, and it isn't easy. It's a crowded market to sell your services. And the reality is you might have really good client relationships now, but it's about making sure, and that was the big thing of going back to the sort of client that said, we need you more. The big challenge, if you like, in the early stages was diluting the reliance that we had on that one client. So building up other clients to make sure that if something happened to them, that didn't have a disastrous impact on us as a business. And I think that's the thing that I would say is that, you have your core clients and your clients that you work really well with, but you've always got to be evolving and developing that client base. Because I think if you rest on your laurels of having a couple of trophy clients, whilst that might be great, things happen within those clients, and you are very much as an independent, whether that's if you're in a fee sharing business or whether you're setting up as your own law firm, is that you can't control what happens because the market is the market, clients are the clients, personalities, people change within clients. So you've always got to have like one eye on the future, on the next client. And that I think that's the difference between a successful law firm and a law firm that doesn't really progress and grow. And there's no magic answer to that. It's hard work, but you've just got to make sure you've got your marketing and your business development right. And again, think about the sectors. That worked really well for us. We're having that reputation in the recruitment industry. They didn't care whether you were a big firm or a small firm as long as you did the work because you had that reputation. And I think that was invaluable as well. And I would say that other people found it, other disciplines within HRC perhaps found it more difficult to make a name for themselves without that sort of sector specialism that you could easily market.
No, definitely. And in terms of just general sort of career beyond going independent, for those wanting to stay at a firm, whether it's a senior associate or an associate, in terms of moving to the next stage of their career and growing, what advice can you impart there?
I think you've got to, as I was saying earlier, it's about learning your craft in the early stages. I think you always have to learn your craft. That's one of the good things about law is it's never still. You're always learning something new. Every day is a new day of learning. So you continue to do that, but at the same time, understand the importance of clients and client relationships, because that's, it's the combination of the two. It's being a really good lawyer, and that's technical ability, but at the same time, it's about being someone that a client wants to buy legal services from. And you can't do one without the other. There's, very few firms will promote on the grounds of just being a fantastic technical lawyer, because if no client likes working with you and wants to work with you, then you question whether you are the package for someone to be sort of promoting. And likewise, if you're very good with clients but technically not great, well, you might get away with that, because if you've got a good team of technical lawyers sitting behind that you can pass the work to, there's some benefit to that. But the perfect would be to get that package and that ability right, because then it makes it very difficult for a firm not to want to promote and encourage you and develop you, and just to take every development opportunity that you get. And again, it is hard work, but it pays off.
You spoke earlier on about being sort of 18, going to an open day down on the train at Cardiff University. What advice would you give 18-year-old Simon if you could go back and impart some of your wisdom?
Would you say M&S?
Yeah, no. I would, 18-year-old me, probably spend more time studying and less time drinking. But then at the same time, actually, like last weekend, I went away with friends from school that, in some respects I've known for 37 years now. So, you wouldn't have those friendships if you've not invested in the friendship. So, I don't know, perhaps I did get the balance right. I think if you talk to my parents at the time, they'd tell you that I didn't, that I need to spend more time studying. But I think just really don't be in such a rush. And I think, when you're training to become a lawyer or any professional, I think it's such a hamster wheel of, you do your A-levels, you do GCSEs, you do your A-levels, you do your degree, your undergraduate degree, then you do whatever professional, and you do training contracts, and then it is such a hamster wheel that you can get on and just go for the next goal or the next objective, but actually enjoy it a bit more. Don't worry too much about what's coming next, because actually things turn out okay. I think fate sort of guides you in the right direction. Whereas I think at 18, I was sort of very much like, I've got all this mountain to climb, and I was in a real rush to get there, where actually, and I think times are slightly different now. So having like a gap year, for example, was an absolute unheard of. Not doing a law degree, you were told, if you wanted to be a solicitor, then you've got to do a law degree, which again has changed now. So I think things are a lot more relaxed than they perhaps were. But at the same time, I still think people are very sort of like, I've got to get, and that's why lots of people qualify. And I was the same. You get your piece of paper saying you're a solicitor, and you're like, oh, the hard work's paid off. And then you realise that's not the top of the mountain. That's just the sort of first ridge, and then you're off again. And I think at 18, you just sort of need to learn to just take your time, enjoy the journey, rather than sort of chase the destination constantly. That was what I tell myself, I think.
I think that's really, really good advice for everyone. Not particular phenomenon in the UK, but definitely from sort of driving around the US, like you often see lots of billboards with lawyers on. If you had to create a billboard of yourself, what would be on it?
Classical Simon.
Not me. I don't know, actually. That's a really good question. I just hate that whole sort of cringy American sort of like, I'd sort of probably much more go for the sort of quiet, understated sort of, just not my picture on it whatsoever, but probably just some sort of client testimonials.
Yes,
that's what I would go.
No cheesy caption or anything.
Not like the Texas Hammer or someone with a flamethrower.
Yeah. I mean, I've not even got any sort of like good stories of sort of like, some sort of, there are certain people that have sort of like, are known by sort of funny names. I've not got that. I think the best I ever got was some sort of passive aggressive solicitor on the other side writing to me, calling me Mr. Whitehead. That was my sort of favourite, but I wouldn't go for that as a billboard.
It seems weird putting yourself on a billboard because you have to put your number out there and literally anyone can call that. So I'm sure you'd get a lot of strange and dodgy phone calls.
That took me right back to the start of my career when I was seeing all the people walking down Northern High Street. Yeah.
Beyond, obviously, you talked about, raising a family, being involved in the theatre, but besides from those two, what other ways can you take your mind off of work as soon as you get home or on the weekends?
Children tend to be all consuming, so it's not that easy. I still like reading, although I don't do enough of that, and I like just getting out and going for a walk. I still find that is my sort of stress reliever of choice. Maybe with the dog if she's behaving herself, but if not, then I'll just go for a wander for an hour. And that's the good thing, we live in the middle of nowhere. So like literally I can walk out of our front door and be on the fells within sort of 10 minutes. And it's very, well, today it was very wild. So I had to drive through floods on the way here, which is not normal, but it just is nice there's no mobile phone signal. Even if it's windy and rainy, it's just nice just to sort of get out and get some fresh air. So that tends to be my sort of go-to stress relief.
That sounds, I think that for me, that would be a bit scary, like no signal in the middle of the woods, if anything. I think I'd probably find that quite stressful if I didn't know the area. I'm just quite, I don't know, it's quite nice of sort of like you might come back to like 3 missed calls. It's like, well, you don't feel the guilt of it buzzing in your pocket and not ignoring it. But yeah, no, it's not, it's nice just to be sort of out in the wilds, really, where you can just see for miles and there's very little to see, really, other than sort of beautiful scenery. So for me, that's quite sort of relaxing, rather than being at home being pestered about whatever new game someone wants to buy off some sort of dodgy website. You touched also a bit on, reading. You like to read every now and again, but what books have you personally read and gifted other people that have really helped in shaping your career?
Helped in shaping my career, probably very few. I was bitten by the bug early on by John Grisham, which is obviously a very American sort of law. It always tickled me about how different their system is and how different lawyers are perceived over there. So I tended to read those, but I've really stayed away from books. I tell you, the one book that I have read that I would really recommend, which isn't a legal book, but it's a really good book about just being resilient and enjoying the journey. And it's a book called A Time to Breathe. And it's written by a psychologist that specialises in workplace. And we did a session, he's in the middle of COVID or post-COVID at work, where he did a webinar and everyone could go. And it's a really rare event where people went, number one, but then everyone got something from it. Whatever you were, a partner, trainee solicitor, admin, marketing, whatever you were in the business, he talked to you, and it's all about really, as a title, A Time to Breathe. What have you aspired to? Enjoying the journey, taking the time, and trying to remove some of the guilt I think that everyone was feeling, and certainly post-COVID or middle of COVID, it really helped, I think. So that's the one book I've recommended to a few friends, not necessarily in law, but who are all having that sort of, not crisis, but sort of, is this it? We've worked all these years and it just feels like, and I think that's quite prevalent post-COVID, of sort of reassessing what you want and whether, there's lots of that, whether it's sort of friends who are psychologists or friends who are accountants. It's sort of like, it's allowed people to reassess. And that can be quite a scary thing when you've been doing one thing forever. And this book's really good at sort of explaining you can do that, but actually it doesn't matter. The same things happen whether you do psychology, whether you're doing law, whether you're doing accountancy. It's just a natural phenomenon, and these are the tools that will help you do it. So that's my must read.
There's nothing like a good existential crisis to, I guess, make people sort of consider, what they're doing.
I think that's right. I think, as an employment lawyer, we've seen so much of that, of, people either genuinely being ill, whether it be long COVID or what it may be, but actually much more of a sort of people, employers struggling with what they perceive as employees having changed in their approach. Sort of like pre-COVID, they would have been, a really good employee that didn't cause me any problems, and then all of a sudden they're a problem employee, and not really understanding why and how that's happened. But yeah, no, I agree. I think it's just one of those human nature things, isn't it?
100%. Final question before we move on to the next segment. If you could change one thing about the legal industry, what would it be?
Emails. And I think this is across the whole piece, not necessarily something about the legal industry. But I think everyone expects everything so much quicker. And certainly this is true of the law. Sometimes you need time to think. Sometimes you need time to breathe. Sometimes you need to go, actually, I think that might be the answer, but I need to just go away and have a cup of coffee or go and do something different and then come back to it and sort of go, yeah, or no, actually, I'm going to change that. So I think the sort of speed within which everything seems to need to get dealt with can be tricky, certainly within the legal profession. And I suppose the other thing would then be reintroduce legal aid and sort out the funding in respect of courts and tribunals so that things can move a hell of a lot quicker and justice is more accessible. Because I think it's becoming more and more just someone that can afford it. I mean, I had one yesterday where, there's a decision been made by the government that has basically ruined this recruitment business, and they can't afford to take a judicial review. So the government will get away with that. I mean, there is arguments either way, but ultimately, there should be the ability to challenge these decisions if they've got such a big effect on someone's livelihood. And I just don't feel that level of access exists these days. So that would probably be my big sort of political bit of fund it properly and make sure that there is access to justice.
Yeah, noble sentiments. Definitely with the way the country is at the moment.
Welcome back to this podcast of Beyond the Suit. In our episode with Simon Whitehead, we have now moved on to the segment portion of the show, which is Click to Agree. Essentially, what I'm going to do is just shout out a few statements and then you would choose whether or not you agree with them. Obviously, feel free to explain your reasoning, and I promise it's not nothing going to be too detrimental to yourself.
Some sort of typical lawyer's caveat then.
Yeah, a bit under the hot seat.
Starting off, making partner is harder than ever.
Agree. Definitely, yeah, because I think it's just very competitive. I think it's still what everyone aspires to. And, partnership needs business to grow for it to continue to do that. So it's, it's much more rigorous than I think it used to be.
Working from home is unproductive.
Disagree. I think it depends what you do in. I don't personally think you can work at home 100% of the time, but I do think it's really useful if you're going to get I spent 2 days last week doing witness statements, which I would never have got done in the office. So yeah, it sometimes works.
The office is not a place for casual clothes.
Disagree. But the first, this is a long time ago, but the first Dress Down Friday policy that was implemented at Brabners, probably early 2000s, would have required you to go and buy a new uniform, because it basically just sounded like you were going to the golf course. So it's good that it's completely changed, but no, I don't think it matters. I think clients, depends on the client. I think most of my clients would expect to see me casual rather than smart.
It can be damaging for lawyers to have social media profiles.
Agree in some cases. Not the most social media savvy bunch of people generally.
Stick to LinkedIn.
Yeah, but I think yes in some cases, but again that's a generational thing I think too.
AI will replace lawyers.
I think it already is to a certain degree, and I think that's right, because I I think there's a lot of what we do that really can be done easier, but I don't think AI is going to ever be the solution. I think AI can save time in reviewing a document, but I still think at this moment in time anyway, you need someone, a good lawyer, to look at then what AI has produced to understand what's relevant, what's needed and what needed.
Working from home can ruin a firm's culture.
I disagree. I think it done correctly, I think it can add to the culture, because I think, it allows, we're talking about the challenges of having a family and having outside responsibilities. It just means that you end up with a more diverse workforce if you're able to accommodate those cultural differences. So, which I think working from home can do.
Film or theatre?
I would say theatre, really.
I guess that was the answer was predetermined. Are you not much, as you're sort of interested in theatre a lot, is that the film sort of take a back seat, or are you still very much...
Yeah. I would say that the films that I generally go and see tend to be what teenagers would want to go and see, as opposed to what I would go and choose to go and see. But I'm not against film. I just like live theatre. I think it adds something extra.
I guess this is quite an important and controversial question, but pineapple on pizza.
Yeah, you see, I agree. I'm quite happy with pineapple on pizza. I won't always have it, but it doesn't.
Does work.
Yeah,
I completely disagree with that.
It works.
Wrong people.
I have no Italian roots, so I'm quite happy to say that
it's
I quite
easy
like
just
some pineapple.
to break it.
And finally, everyone should sing an initiation song.
Oh God, disagree.
No.
that culturally, that would, if someone suggested anything in any interview stage that was a requirement, we would see me heading for the door quicker than anything else.
What would your song be if you had to, on the spot, if you had to sing?
I'd probably feign illness rather than sing. And that goes for, I remember we once did a Christmas party which ended up in a karaoke pod, and literally, I think I spent the whole night just going, no.
Really?
Yeah. I think I've done it once, and that was my friend's 21st birthday party. And I would never do it again. No, yeah, it doesn't fill me with any sort of joy whatsoever.
Well, that moves us nicely onto our last question, and it's a question that we regularly keep on and ask every guest that comes on this podcast. I'm sure you've heard of Suits, not too sure how familiar you are with it, but obviously the basis, two main characters that are Mike and Harvey. Harvey's the partner, Mike's the associate, and there's an episode where it gets a bit heated, and Harvey asks Mike, what would you do if your back was to a wall and a gun was at your head? So I'm gonna get that question and just sort of send it to you. Hopefully not literally you've had a back to your wall and a gun to your head, but have you ever felt like a scenario where you've been in that position, and what have you done to get out of it?
Yeah, well, I think firstly, what I'd say is it's really interesting that when you ask most lawyers about why they became lawyers, TV plays a big part in it. So my generation tends to be LA law. Then you've got the Ally McBeal generation, and now you've got the Suits generation. So that's quite an interesting fact. I have a funny story around the guns. So I think I was newly qualified in litigation, or as a trainee. I got sent to Blackpool to take possession of a kebab shop, the Glamour. And the bailiff who was so we'd been to court, got the order for possession, and then you had to go and basically put the notice on the window to show that you'd taken possession of the premises. And the bailiff decided, and to this day I don't know how accurate this was, but he had rung the police to tip them off that the guy who was renting the kebab shop had a firearms history. So I turn up to this kebab shop in Blackpool to meet the bailiff. And I think because I was a trainee or quite naive, he made me go and put the notice on the window rather than him do it. So I had to have a bulletproof vest on with a marksman, because they thought he was going to shoot. And, as a very young, naive, newly qualified or trainee solicitor, I'm sort of like, okay, yeah, doing that. So not quite a gun to my head, but that was a funny story involving a gun. But I don't know. I think as a lawyer, you just rely on words. So you try and talk your way out of it, I think, in reality, and that's what you would hope you would try and do. The reality is probably something very different. If someone had a gun to my head, I don't know. Probably just go very quiet. But I think you would hope that you could not argue your way out, but sort of at least put a good argument together as to why you should get out of that sticky situation that you've been put in.
Is there a time that you've, in your career, where you felt like, metaphorically speaking, you've had that gun to your head and you were able to get out of it?
Not really. I mean, I think, I think you could probably look at sort of, I don't know, people handing in their notice who are key members of the team. And sometimes you can feel that can be a gun to your head because you've got a good team that's firing on all cylinders. And I think, you either, especially if you're blindsided and you've not seen it coming, that you can feel that all of a sudden, you've got to cave to the demands of whatever they want to maintain that sort of team sort of ethos and structure. And sometimes that's the right decision to do because, it is the right decision. You've perhaps not kept up with market rates. You've not spotted that, they want more development than you've perhaps been offering. There's normally an underlying reason to it. And then other cases, it can be actually, it's a really good opportunity for you and you should ultimately take it. And that's a difficult message and position to reach because obviously that's not necessarily in the best interest of you or your team, but it's perhaps in the best interest of the person that wants to move on to pastures new. So that's probably the most relevant one I can think of.
Interesting. You are the first guest that we've had on who's literally had to don a bulletproof
I know,
vest.
that's insane.
The joy of being a solicitor in the early 2000s. Yeah, it's it was an odd day all round, and it was very weird. And if I said to one of my trainees now, "You're off to Blackpool to take possession of a kebab shop," they'd be sort of like, "What?"
I have to say, Simon, it's been absolutely fabulous having you on the podcast. I think you've been a brilliant guest.
Agreed.
And it's been really, really interesting. We've been the Beyond the Suit podcast powered by Fintelligent. Simon, if people are in need of your services, do they need to shine a light into the sky, Batman-esque? Where can they where can they find you?
So yeah, obviously Brabners website, LinkedIn. Simon.Whitehead at Brabners.com. And as I say, if you Google that, then my horrible face should pop up somewhere. And it's a horrible picture, so that's not what you get in the flesh.
And as someone who is in the recruitment industry, owns 2 recruitment businesses, and has used Simon's services, I'd highly recommend him.
That's very kind of you, James. Thank you.
You've been a brilliant guest, Simon. We've been Beyond the Suit. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Suit, brought to you by Fintelligent. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe, like and leave a review. Every time you do, it helps others find the show. If you're interested in finding out more about Fintelligent and how we can assist you in taking the next step in your legal career or making your next exciting hire, head over to fintelligent.co.uk. Join us next time for more insightful conversations on Beyond the Suit podcast.